we call upon leader of opposition.
Prime Minister overachieving behavior doesn't happen because of notions of productivity, but simply because of the notion of being scared and the depiction of failure that is going on in society. Therefore, we think the whole setup done by Prime Minister is quite misleading and put opposition in quite a difficult bench. First of all, we need to understand that productivity is the setup done by Prime Minister regarding productivity is eligible, because you need to understand that all those overachieving behavior, the thing that, for example, children needs to work very hard, need to study very hard, go into the most favorite university, for example, is all that is being described as the behavior of is a behavior that only resulted from the notion of being scared and depictions of having a failure in the future and in the long run. It's something that is different with productivity. Because in order to discuss this kind of topic, you need to understand that the nature of productivity is the actions of only maximizing all the resources that you have in hand, but only also based on personal interest. This is the reason because you only subscribe to productivity notions when you are interested in said subject. For example, you only scroll through, for example, if you are interested in art, for example, you only scroll to your Instagram timeline or social media timeline that only boost and glorify the productivity of, for example, doing arts in your life. This is something that we regret coming on from Prime Minister, because if you want to debate about, for example, whether people are being burdened or being stressed in their life because of, for example, offer achieving behavior, I think that that should be reserved for other debates. But in this kind of topic, we think that what should be the tipping point is on whether this kind of glorification of productivity bring benefits or brings harms toward the notions that people are going on, especially through this kind of social distancing and staying at home times. First of all, you need to understand the characteristic. First of all, we concede to the fact that productivity bring the glorifications of productivity bring negative nuance, which is something that actually disincentivize people who take a break. For example, people who choose to shut down and not do anything as something that is deemed as counterproductive or non-productive. This is something that we will show to you. Given the benefits inside, this is something that we could give away. First of all, especially during this kind of social distancing time, popularity have gained rise in popularity. This kind of social distancing policies where people are expected to stay at home, and due to the rise of productivity glorification, that narratives excels and becomes a basic standard of today's lifestyle. First of all, I will talk about two things in my substantive. Firstly, the glorification of productivity doesn't necessarily translate to toxic productivity. But secondly, what is the benefit of glorification of productivity in this kind of cases? First of all, why this doesn't translate to toxic productivity? Because you need to understand. First of all, though we think that this kind of glorification might bring, for example, self-deprecation, or, for example, lower the self-esteem for those individuals who think that they are not productive enough during these times of pandemic and social distancing. You need to understand that the core belief and intention where this kind of glorification happen. This kind of glorification happen, for example, mainly through social media platform where people post what they have done during, for example, this kind of social distancing at home. For example, some people have been excels in, for example, cooking skills. For example, the others have excels in art skills. For example, the others have plant a botanical garden in their home. We think that in order to understand this, is that you need to understand what is the core belief and intention from people posting their productivity and glorifying their productivity, or endorsing their productivity during home. Is that you need to understand the core belief of that is only to motivate others to do the same or to believe in the same cause. We think that this is also something that is being overshadowed by the Prime Minister in her speech. We think that the reasons why people promote productivity, to endorse productivity, even until the essence of glorifying it, is that the core belief of that is only to create a better future for the state targeted individuals. For example, parents want the best for their children. Therefore, for example, they keep demanding the best education from them. For example, they keep demanding the best workplaces for them, because we think that the reasons and the motive behind that is altruistic. Because parents always wanted the best for their children. Therefore, even if productivity reaches the essence of glorifying, that's permissible and justifiable. Because in the case of motive, we think that there's no evil intention coming on from the state actors. We think that if this kind of things comes out of pure basic altruistic motive, that there is justified for this kind of glorification of productivity to exist in the very first place. That even if government wanted to keep arguing that this notion stimulate toxic productivity, we believe that the same problem also occurs, for example, if the said individuals have under their cases where the individuals have been labeling themselves as useless and stagnant in society. So that even without glorification of productivity, individuals will simply as to self-depress themselves and also the self-deprecations themselves the moment, for example, they see others people access in their life, the moment, for example, they are being envious of others people achievement in their life, that even without glorification of productivity, there is something that also happens in prime minister in government benches cases. Therefore, we think that the productivity that happens under other benches given given the sacrifices inside, we think that it is better achievable under others under our bench. Secondly, the second question: what is the benefits of glorification of productivity, specifically talking about the individuals? First of all, the glorification of productivity saves us, especially in times of pandemic and staying at home alone. We think that it saves us from isolation and emptiness. Why is this important? Because you need to understand the moment, for example, you are being isolated at home and you only stay at home without interacting and socializing with other people. The only thing that can keep you going and thriving further is that there is end goal. During this kind of social distancing and isolation. For example, people who excels in who excels in cooking skills, those people can try for further recipe that they are trying to achieve, other than, for example, isolating themselves and feel the soul emptiness of being alone, for example, in their dorm, for example, their dormitories or in their own home. This is the only thing that keep people sane and keep people going on into the future, into stepping into the future. That this kind of glorification of productivity is the only thing that can drive people into the future. Let's see what happens comparatively in the government bench. The moment, for example, we don't glorify this kind of productivity is the moment, for example, people simply doesn't have any drive in the future, that simply doesn't have any end goals and any purposes anymore in the future. The only thing that could keep them motivated in times of emergency like this is the glorification of productivity. But to the second point, that this is we can think that the glorification of productivity is the only form of objective standard of someone's success, because you simply cannot judge whether someone have access in it, for example, in their time at home with other available parameter. For example, whether they have been able to successfully survive this kind of pandemic, survive this kind of isolation, other than the glorification of productivity. For example, the moment, for example, you can judge yourself of how much you have improved during this kind of pandemic, of how much you have improved during this kind of self-isolation, is through this kind of glorification of productivity. That this is the only thing that can satisfy your personal standard of happiness during this kind of self-isolation. And for all of those reasons, I rest my.
We thank Leader of Opposition. We call upon Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay, first I'll start off with a few responses to the side's opening opposition. So we think that opening opposition throughout his entire speech has been talking about individual productivity, and we think that this is a very unfair narrative to bring into this debate. Why so? Because when you talk about individual productivity, right, about maximizing the resources, right, an individual's interpretation of what is being productive, sure, it can be extremely subjective, but then it paints a narrative that, okay, if today I want to take a rest, so I'll go to sleep in bed for a while, for about 5 hours, yes, I'm productive. Today I feel like cooking, and I did cook it, and I feel like I'm productive. I don't think this is a very fair narrative to paint towards it. And I think that this debate should be centered around focusing on societal productivity, right? How society views productivity within the workplace, and why is it being over-glorified by society in certain cases, right? It's all about people achievements, about the results, about doing something, about earning in big money, cold hard cash, about basically achieving, right? Achieving something within your life, having impact or influence within society itself, right? We should be talking about the huge narrative, which is this. We're not talking about individual productivity, sense of productivity, which is something that is completely arbitrary, subjective, and cannot really even be quantified to any certain extent, right? And now moving on towards how they talk about how like status quo, it's already mutually inclusive on both sides of how there are already people pushing other people, and the results of this productivity is because it has already existed and people are going to self-depreciate anyway. This doesn't mean that the glorification of productivity hasn't exacerbated the situation, right? And later I'm going to prove to you why it has made the situation worse and the repercussions of this, and that's why we regret the glorification of productivity, right? So now, and also another point, they talk about how having an end goal is extremely helpful and need to be productive. I think this is also one to show the inconsistency within inside opening house, because they talk about how much you can improve. And they talk about cooking and things like that, which is all skill-based, right? So what happens when people don't actually do these kinds of things? When people just lay at home and then they have an existential dread, they think, oh, what am I going to do? That kind of thing. When they choose to ignore their friends and their social circle, they choose not to go on Zoom and go on meetings with their friends, have fun activities with friends online, for example, when they choose to disrupt and cut off their social life because they think that it is not as productive as cooking and improving their own skills at home, that's a very painful and very sad narrative to have, right? And problematic on the same side. But now moving on to my arguments, right? So I have two. Number one, I'm going to even further paint you the narrative of what the status quo look like. Number two, what is so regrettable about the glorification of that. So now moving on, what does status quo look like, right? Let's look at the case of self, right? When we are younger in terms of education, why did my first speaker then talk about people achievements, right? Because we understand in both academics and skill-based education. Let's say, for example, you do go to poly school, right? You taught art, you taught culinary, right? In academics, it's all about numbers. It's all about scoring that A1 in your test, so that the proof that you're being productive, to prove that you spend time doing your vision at home and not slacking off, right? And also skill-based, then it's all about you lack the creativity anymore because it's all about how many dishes can you produce, can you do it on time or not? You lose expressiveness, and then when you glorify productivity, you ignore the mental aspects of student. You basically tell them, you also ignore the virtues that students might have. Let's say, for example, a student who isn't scoring that well, who isn't as productive, maybe he doesn't really study. However, he has honest and he has good leadership within the school itself, right? We think that he completely ignores this, and then when he gets bad results and he gets punished by the system because he can't go towards A levels or can't go to university or get a scholarship, we tell them to suck it up. We tell them that this is just the cruel reality of things. It's just that we have to have results, the proof of our existence, to prove that we have worth within society itself. And we think this is a very bad message, as spoken by my first speaker. When you instrumentalize people, when you tell people that they're just cogs in the wheel, that's extremely bad. But number two, let's talk about workplace, right? When you talk about people, so there's two things: the mental aspects of things that follow the same trend with students. How they're seen as cogs in the machine, they work themselves to death, right? And that's when mental issues start falling on. And then when their employers tell them, oh, you're just replaceable, and now you have problems really, right? You're not performing as well. I'm just going to kick you out. I'm not going to solve anything. I'm not going to help you. And I think that's very problematic. And now talking about and also, people then no longer care about their craft anymore, especially when it comes to jobs and mass producing things anymore. People cut corners. People focus on the quantitative aspects because if you have more products, you sell more, you make more profit. You don't care about the quality of things anymore. And that's extremely problematic. Now, moving on to what is regrettable about over glorifying productivity, right? So this is where you, number one, on three levels. First level, you alienate the underprivileged, you alienate the poor. Why? Because poor and underprivileged people have less opportunities. Maybe let's say, for example, for children and students, they can't go to tuition, they can't improve their results as much as those kids who have a good life, who are from a middle income or high income family, right? And then you then alienate these people because they have less opportunities to then allow for them to perform better within school themselves. So therefore, you see these people as, and you paint the narrative or you reinforce the stereotype, oh, poor people are lazy, or poor people can't achieve as much, right? And you think this is wrong. Now, on the second level, right, people disconnect themselves from society. How? From the immediate family, from their own family, from intimate relationships, social circles, workplace colleagues. How? Because in work, what the side opening opposition have failed to see is that when you glorify productivity, he has never mentioned about anything regarding towards the social circle, right? Which means that he kind of already admits that, like, okay, sure, social circles are not seeing something that's really, let's say, for example, productive. But even if they do see it as something that's productive, it becomes like when you glorify productivity, making friends is all like a means to an end. You're using them to pull through a business deal. You're being friendly with them because you want to have a trade with them later on in life, or you want to have an opportunity to obtain an opportunity within the workplace itself. And we think this paints a very terrible narrative within society itself, because now nobody really trusts anybody. You cannot form any genuine relationships with anybody. And I think this is extremely problematic because then everybody would just lose their identity itself, which leads on to my third level analysis, which is when we cease to become human in general and we lose our humanity because we over glorify productivity. Why? Because now virtues are forgotten. Being honest is no longer something that's done when it can net you a business deal that earns you millions of dollars. For example, or being kind-hearted and helping somebody when you waste time and you can walk faster and went early to your workplace, for example, do more work. We think the point in which that in society, when all person that clearly needs help who fell down on the street and nobody just helps her and just walks past her looking at their phones, looking at stocks, or looking at their online assignment, homework assignment, for example, this is a very painful society to look at, and it's extremely depressing to even see, right? So we think that society, we then shape the glorification of productivity shapes a society that's extremely individualistic and extremely self-centered. This is something we don't want on government side. So very proud to regret the over glorification of productivity.
We thank Deputy Prime Minister. We call upon Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Okay. Sorry, a few seconds. The first thing that the opening government failed to understand in the case of opening opposition is that there is a drawline of difference that we made between the societal definitions of what means productive and also the overachieving mentality that the opening government threw in this debate as the characterizations precisely earlier, right? We think that number one, my leader of opposition has told you that the difference of it is that when people are overachieved, it's most likely happens not because of the notions of productive, but it happens because of the notions of pressure and failure that are suppressed by the older generations towards them, and the haunt that continuously happen towards them, and the reasons why people become like interested to overachieve in order to make sure that they are in an echo chamber, right? But second of all, we think that the idea of societal definitions that they threw toward us was something that is not mutually exclusive, right? Because it also happened on the side of opening government when they told you that not going out means that people are sad, not being able to socialize means that you are somebody that is pathetic, or something that is also homogenizing that all individuals need to basically socialize, and without regarding that the fact that there are also people that are unable to socialize, for example, or are less likely want to socialize. We think these are also individuals we need to also protect. And on the side of opening opposition, I'm going to tell you why the glorifications of productivity is something that is protecting these individuals that we want to champion. So before that, I'm also having like several independent rebuttals. Number one is that they said that the nuance of productivity costs you a lot of disadvantage. For instance, when you are in an office, when you are unable to be as productive as previously, you are going to be seen as someone who is down in performance. We think that that does not happen in an instant, because most likely there is always a regulations by the company, regulated by the government, in order to ensure that every worker, every employers in your company have certain regulated amounts of work. So most likely the reasons of people to become down in performance to an extreme level that was seen by the manager maybe would happen because of a counterproductive moment of these individuals, when the people are suddenly become so lazy and not want to engage with any corporate jobs. Then we think the justifications of people to warn you is something that is justified, right? But moreover, when they said that they said that people are going to be less likely sociable. We think it is wrong, because in order for us to be productive, we think it is something that when we calculate the quantitative quality of our work, it means that when we are able to work as many as possible, when we are able to accomplish as many things as possible, it requires people to work smart. And in order to do that, people have to cooperate and associate themselves with people in order to ensure that they are able to delegate their job to people, and also are able to basically distribute their jobs in order to accomplish the duty as a whole team, right? This requires a socializing skills too, and this socializing is something that is more meaningful under the opening oppositions, because this socialization is something that is often on the goal centric, and something that is resulting into something that's productive for the people, not like hanging out, having fun, and talk about another people, and and nourishing and more like toxic negativity onto their minds. But second of all, that we culture, and something that was very last engaged by the opening government, was the fact that why glorifications of this productivity is important. To a certain extent, like parents telling the children to work hard as something that is on the basis of altruistic motive. And why this altruistic motive is something that is important to persist, because the incentives of leisure, such as advertisement for people to check into new song, new music, new video, or games, or other kind of things during this kind of pandemic, are something that is massive, right? And we think that the importance of the glorifications of productivity by the parents and others are something that is required to perceive into this world in order to make sure that there is a counterbalancing of the ads and other kind of things that are massively promoted into this world. So the extensions of me as the DLO is that why this kind of glorification allow more protections for the people who oftentimes isolated. Because with the fact of glorifications, people will see that being productive is seen as something that is positive, right? And it allows echo chamber for the isolated individuals to always be interviewed and called out for things like personal conditions, asking them to go out and asking them about their own personal conditions. Because notice that sometimes people don't like this. People don't like this kind of conditions of socialization that is currently happening in status quo. And that's why we think our side of the house benefit this individual. Because this glorifications validates the act of these individuals to do their activities and to allow them to have more capital of saying no towards the invitations that are thrown by their friend for something that is less productive, as something that is going to cost them in terms of like financial loss, for instances, or to cost them into more mental exhaustions because simply they don't like that kind of engagement into socializations, for example. Without these glorifications, being busy is going to be seen as an excuse to escape, and it demonizes the hardships of individual that they have tried to work so hard for themselves and try to basically gain more capital for themselves. Is going to be seen as something that is just a motive to hide and to escape from this kind of situation. It's going to cause more frustrations for them and going to cause even more harms towards their mentality. 6 minutes, sorry. So therefore, under our side, why we think that the glorification is something that is better? Because noted on the worst case scenario on our side, even when people who are laced around a day, it might be labeled as somebody who is lazy or might labeled to be somebody that is counterproductive. But we think that there is also an ability for individual to eventually, but we think that it is something that is better, right? Because the compensations of this glorification is something that is quite matterful. You are allowed to have more like job promotions, for example, if you are being productive, or you are able to allow more like bonuses. And we think that you are able to compensate yourselves in the future for being productive by buying yourself things that you like to gain for yourselves, for instance. And we think that this is something that we can mechanize in order to counterbalancing the stress that you can have by being productive, for instances. And for all these reasons, we are proud to propose.
We thank Deputy Leader of Opposition. We now move to the closing half of the debate and start with Member of Government.
Opening government talked about three things. They talked about burnout and the stress on people. They talked about the loss of opportunities for people to do things. And they talked about the instrumentalization of people. In essence, they focused on the effects, the sum of the effects of glorification on people. What we are going to do is to focus on its effect of the society. In my first extension, I will talk about the cost of society, how this glorification costs society immensely in the long run. And in my second extension, I will talk about how this glorification reduces productivity of the society in the long run. Now, glorification of productivity ingrains the idea that we need to spend excessive amounts of time on work to be productive. This means that people constantly think about how they can complete a certain assignment or work even when they're outside of working hours, such as on weekends. And spending way too much time on work means two things. Firstly, it means that they're neglecting their health because they are not only unwilling to supposedly waste time exercising, but also very willing to sacrifice their sleep so they can spend more time on working, which will result in that tiny bit more productivity. No, thank you. And exercise and sleep are crucial in maintaining one's health. Now, what is the other thing that spending way too much time on work means? It also means you're neglecting the cultivation of strong family relationships, and where you spend more time on your work at the expense of family bonding time, which of course results in weak family bonds, weak family relations, poor understanding between family members, and and in this scenario, it's very hard to provide emotional support for true emotional, genuine support for each other because you really have no idea what they're going through, and you don't really understand them. And this is very problematic because we rely on these relationships for emotional support, for these emotional support. And what happens when you don't have these emotional support structures is that you're more likely to fall into a state of depression, and in extreme cases, consume drugs, join gangs, etc., because you feel that you're being neglected or you feel really sad. Now, the problems, all these problems I listed here about bad health, state depression, blah, 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 are not only detrimental to us humans, but also take a massive toll on the society, resources of society. And this is because the society will now have to devote resources to solve these problems via things like providing expensive healthcare and things like drug rehabilitation, all of which, mind you, could have been avoided if productivity had not been glorified, but instead, the well-being of humans was emphasized and prioritized. Now, to avoid these costs, we must do away with glorification. These costs to society, remember the overall society, we must do away with glorification and note that this area of society and its impact on society was not covered by the opening government. Now, secondly, this glorification of productivity reduces productivity of the society in the long run. The opening government told you about how the glorification of productivity leads to burnout and impacts humans. We're going to build on that and tell you why this, more importantly and ironically, actually decreases productivity of the society in the long run. When people burn out, this such as through things like constant stress due to the work, insufficient rest, maybe the lack of happiness, they become much less functional and much less capable members of society. This, of course, causes them to become demoralized and hence start working at a lower productivity rate than if everyone was being, lower productivity rate if people were just let to be productive on their own, work when they see fit to like earn money and all that stuff, and certainly lower than the previous productivity rates. And this will cause the society to obviously reduce the productivity as a whole. And therefore, ironically, as you can see, the glorification of productivity actually has a counterproductive effect of reducing its productivity. Now, on to rebuttals of the opening opposition. They said, firstly, that, or rather through whatever they said, what we've gathered is they're basically trying to say that the only way to be happy is to be productive. And this is absolutely ridiculous. Why is that so? True happiness comes from social relations and friendships. And why is that? I'll tell you now. This is because this is rooted in the fact that humans are intrinsically social creatures. Since we came to being, we have thrived on these social connections and all that. And how do we know? Well, if being happy is so dependent on one's productivity, then why is it that cavemen were able to live happily and all that instead of committing suicide or something? And this is despite the fact, mind you, that no one was competing to be super productive. There was no glorification of productivity whatsoever. In fact, I don't think they even had the language. But the reason why they were able to be happy and thrive is because of the social connections they had. They lived in tribes, they lived with their families, and these social connections, social time is something that kept them happy. And you know something? According, as mentioned, as what I mentioned earlier, these are the things that you cannot cultivate because of the glorification of productivity. Now, they also weirdly argue that the glorification of productivity can somehow save you from isolation and quarantine. We find this ridiculous because quarantine actually because quarantine not only limited how productive people could have been at their homes through work since they're unable to be at the physical workplace, and this actually quarantine actually gave them the opportunity to do things that were impossible without quarantine because they had no time, such as again recultivating the family bonds, spending more time with the family since literally everyone's at home, and creating these family bonds, which actually again help to bolster one's happiness. And this can only all be done without the glorification of productivity. So what have we seen here? We have seen that number one, opposition's case is completely flawed because productivity does not rest on happiness does not rest on productivity. And secondly, we have seen that we have built on opening government's arguments on its impact of the glorification of productivity on people by talking about its impacts on society, on the general society. Thank you.
We thank member of government. We call upon member of opposition.
Yeah, I'll start in a second. Right. So what has government told you thus far? Government has essentially told you, and in a case that CG more or less has derived from OG, so more or less I will not be covering with what the subject matter of CG's was specifically. I leave that to Dhruv. I think by and large, what government tells you is that here are a list of reasons for why productivity is bad, all of which are fundamentally linked to the undermining of the human model of existence in terms of, let's say, it causing burnout, it reducing people's happiness, and it instrumentalizing people. Our problem with the entirety of that line of argumentation is that all of this is not a consequence of the glorification of productivity, but a consequence of competition and a sense of achievement. We think that it is especially important in this debate to basically to clarify the notion of what the glorification of productivity is and what it looks like within status quo, and the reason why and how this would pan out if this glorification of productivity would not be there. Strange as it may be, given that no other side in this debate has established this, I think the imperative in this context falls upon CO, and that is what I'll be doing by and large with my speech structure. Right. Firstly, on the notion of what this lack of productivity looks like, panel understand that the human beings fundamentally are competitive creatures. So even if you were to eliminate the prospect of productivity and its glorification from the world, which is something that I'll come into later because I need to establish on this part first, people all around the world will still see differing levels of achievement within their behavior. Person A will inherently accomplish more and accomplish differently than person B. Keeping that information in mind, person B is always going to feel that given that person A is accomplishing more within the context of what is their conventional notion of productivity, even if it were to not be glorified, this person is still going to feel slightly jealous and is going to be aspiring towards a greater sense of material achievement, irrespective of whether or not productivity is glorified within this context, right? We think that then the notion of the glorification of productivity then becomes an out for these people to express this sense. Because if productivity notionally, the basic idea that you need to work on things long term to generate material value or long term longevity based value out of something, these people will, in that sense, person B specifically in this context, who's feeling inferior to person A because person A was simply born with a genuine sense of productivity, person B in this context is going to merely not see an out as to how this person can achieve the same levels of results that person A can. In that context, what productivity does to person B is that it comes and communicates to them a mechanism by which he or she can achieve the same results as person A. Opening, I'll take you at about 4.5, right? So what we mean to say here is that by and large, every single argument that they seem to be presenting within this context is an argument that relies on the sense of competitiveness. And what we are saying is that even if you were to choose to not glorify productivity within the context of human history, I think that the sense of achievements and the sense of competitiveness will still remain. So in that sense, the notion of providing this person outing to begin with sort of helps them escape this inevitable sense of purgatory, wherein they're going to try to achieve more than person A, but are going to be unable to do so because their fundamental sense on how to go about achieving these things is not fundamentally present, right? Which brings me to our constructive case. Three things getting from my speech. Firstly, on the notion of how this affects a child's development, the glorification of productivity. Secondly, on how this pans out within adulthood. And thirdly, on the notion of how the human race would be vastly different if this notion had not been there, right? Firstly, on the idea of children, right? Finally, understand that children, by their very nature during their growth phase, are overcome more or less by animal desires. They are not consumed by the kind of rationality that we as human beings today live in. They don't see long-term value in things. They merely see short-term endorphin boosting thing. They only see value within short-term endorphin boosting things. In that context, if you were to not explain to a child rigorously the value of productivity, in that stage, any child in the world, or most children at the very least, are not going to realize and are not going to develop a sense of what it means to be productive. In the sense that if you don't teach them the value of long-term effort, they'll just stick to the short-term efforts and they'll never realize the value that sticking to something long-term creates. Going back to our previous example of person B and person A, we think that in this context, most children will turn out to be person B, because the only people who will turn out to be like person A are going to be people who are going to be born with an innate sense of developing their skills and creating material wealth. We think that this situation exacerbates the problem the government is trying to eliminate, and we think that our side is much better at sort of providing a medicinal mechanism within this context, right? Secondly, on the notion of how on the notion of how this pans out within adulthood, right? Let's take the context of how an adult functions, right? Having grown into adulthood and having seen the fact that he or she is inherently or fundamentally in terms of working value inferior to someone else, person B and a functioning adult within this context is now going to also start off shirking responsibilities, right? Because the moment you sort of try to take away from the notion of putting in value into work, even if their endorphins seem to reject that notion within that particular instance, that person also starts to slowly reject the responsibilities that he or she has even outside the line of productivity. This means that the average parents are also not going to care about their kids, because in this context, they don't see any sense of responsibility towards their kids beyond the age at which endorphin boosting mechanisms work, which is essentially the age where the child essentially grows up, the age of 18, which is exactly how things work within the wild. We think that the glorification of productivity in that context has led them to realizing the inherent value that is present within these things, and has led them to basically understanding the notion of what it means to put value into something, which has essentially led to the kind of societal order that we live in, that people fundamentally care for each other. As a result of this, we think that that kindness fundamentally is going to be eliminated from the context of society, because people are not able to put in value into their relationship, because that is simply not a neural network that has been built within their heads. Before I move forward, I'll take a PI from your opening.
Even if individuals are not competing with someone else, the glorification of productivity means that many of them believe that in order to have a chance at being successful, they have to work constantly. Why should people have to sacrifice their mental health just for paper achievements?
Look, this is simply a rehashing of what they have been saying, right? Constructively, we think that people spending their entire lives trying to be as productive as someone else is not a consequence of the glorification of productivity. Productivity inherently is not a biased thing. Productivity merely is working on someone for gaining long-term rewards, irrespective of whether what you see on the other side is relevant or not. In the context of productivity, I as a musician will simply try to develop my own music, as opposed to looking at some other person and evaluating my music with respect to someone else. That is the cause of human misery, the difference between value across two people, not the inherent sentiment itself. Which brings me to my third constructive on how societally we would have been very different. Finally, understand that once people have inherently stopped being productive, and had they stopped being productive at some point within the past, we think that a lot of scientific discoveries and inventions would not have persisted, right? Because more people were simply not possessive of that sense of productivity, which means that the kinds of medical facilities that we enjoy today would not have existed. The kinds of scientific discoveries that we experience today, Wi-Fi would not have been there, basic medical facilities would not have been there. We think that within this context, the kind of life expectancy that we would be seeing would have been minus a large chunk of productive achievement that have been made because of making some scientists realize the value of productivity. We think that we would have been living in a much more different world. Within this world, I think that we would be experiencing experiencing a near apocalyptic scenario where people fundamentally would have died by the age of 50 and would have been much worse off, and more people would have died within the context of history in 2020 than they have right now. Dhruv will expand more upon this. Extremely proud to.
We thank member of opposition. We call upon government whip to close for the government bench or something.
Hi, can I be heard if I talk like this?
Yep.
All right, can. We see that opening government, opening opposition, and closing opposition today have made some serious strategic errors in their case and in their setup. We realize that the only side that is able to clear out these issues is the side of closing government, and on those grounds, we take those debates. So let's start with some strategic attacks on opening government. What did they do? They didn't actually clash with opening opposition case. So what was it? Opening opposition provided two substantives. First one about how there's no such thing as bad productivity and how people depreciate themselves anyways. Second one, about how people can only fill out their time using productivity. We see that DPM didn't actually clash nor rebut any of these ideas, and it was member of government was the first person to do that in this debate. So on those grounds, we already win. Second of all, for closing opposition, they didn't actually clash with my member of government substantive at all. So let's recap what his substantive was. First of all, his substantive was on how this decreases overall productivity in your society due to increase in stress. No response at all. Second of all, on how this decreases work-life balance, which results in poorer family build-up, poorer family lifestyle, so on and so forth. No response. On those grounds alone, due to a lack of role fulfillment by these two groups, we already take this debate. So let's deal directly with the substantive coming from closing opposition. What did he say? He said that it is important that we glorify productivity in order to ensure that children know what it means to be productive. But here's where we realize that none of the other groups actually have a clear characterization of what productivity is as well, right? So here's where I say it. Productivity will still exist on the side of government. It just won't be glorified. So what does that mean? That means that on our side, people are still able to be productive if they want to. It's just that on the opposition side, everyone must be productive. Otherwise, they will be treated as unhuman. They'll be treated as a lesser member of society. So therefore, we believe that on our side, things like children will not be taught how to be a valuable member of society. It's simply untrue. They will still be taught how to do that. They just won't be forced into that situation. So why is that a good thing? Let's take a look at the two types of children that will exist here. There's one group of children that has other passions outside of just wanting to chase that A for every single exam. And there's that other group of children that actually do want to be productive. So for that group of children that want to be productive, they will naturally be productive on their own. They will actually drive themselves towards success on their own. They don't need to force them. But for the other group, we realize that in opposition society, they are forced to lead an incredibly miserable life. They are forced to be deviated from anything that they do enjoy. In the world of the opposition, these children aren't actually taught how to be productive members of society. They're just taught how to be miserable. They are taught how to create value for a company, and that's not what we want. Moving on then to the key clashes of today's debate. First of all, on which side helps society the most? Second of all, on which side helps individuals the most? Let's talk about who helps society. Two key ideas. First of all, we prevent burnout in the long term. I'll take you in a moment, sir. How do we do that? In our society right now, people are working extremely hard, some up to like 70 hours a week in order to, gain the next position, become a manager, whatever. In our world, we see, in opposition's world rather, we see that these people are actually sacrificing much of their life in order to do that, including benefiting other areas of society. But before I move on, your POI, please. No? Okay, fine. I'll just continue then. We see that what this does.
I'm sorry.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Take my POI right now?
Yeah. Sure.
Never mind. Go on.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. Then we see that these people don't actually devote time to anything outside of work. Now, let's take a look here. Things outside of work actually matter a lot. What do we see this in? It goes beyond developing the self, as opening government has said. It goes to things like volunteering for your local, like homeless shelter, for your pet shelter, stuff like that. It goes for helping other people that may not result in improving your productivity and your value towards the society, but it's important nonetheless. In a world where productivity is fetishized, as is in the world of the opposition, we see that such a situation will result in the lack of volunteers, result in a lack of societal care for anyone outside of your company and outside of yourself. Second idea brought to you by a member of government. Family connections become worse. So what's the exact impact of that? In reality, the vast majority of people derive true happiness from their family members and from the people around them. This goes to friends as well, but we're just going to talk about family here. So in a world where productivity is the norm and where you are only allowed to be productive, what people do is that they sacrifice family time. They work until extremely late at night in order to be able to make an extra buck, to be able to do more things at your workplace. What that results in is a situation where your individual is not able to spend time with their family members. The harm of that, therefore, is that your family now falls apart. Your children grow up without a father figure, without a mother figure in their life. They grow up without anyone to care about them. Yes, please.
I think that based on your old characterizations, you then are left a burden to prove. Why then the entire things like asking for a job, earning money and whatnot lays as the burden of people thinking to be productive only?
Look, just because you don't want to be productive doesn't mean you no longer need a job. You still need a job to stay alive and survive. What we don't want people doing is to strive towards productivity in a way that sacrifices everything else in your life. Money only brings you material gain. If you have so much material gain but no happiness, there's actually no point. Second of all, now how this hurts, how on which side helps the individual. Opening government brought this whole idea about how with productivity as the norm, you're going to have workers working too hard. I'd like to stand on that idea further. I'll give you two mechanisms as to how this happens, which opening government didn't actually elaborate on. So how do jobs become suddenly, how do these jobs suddenly start hurting workers? Two ways. First of all, workers will now consent to having their work hours increased, will consent to things like lower vacation time and stuff like that, and lower pay. So what happens now is that in such a situation, these workers will obviously suffer. But here's the next and more important thing, is that society is much more okay with this as a whole. We see that in a lot of times, all of these labor regulations, which opening opposition also talk about, regulations, come from electoral politics, right? And how people vote for politicians who support these things. Now, with productivity as the norm, no one's going to vote for workers like pro-worker things, like, say, for example, increasing minimum wage or decreasing work hours or increasing maternity leave. That won't happen because no one cares about the worker anymore. They only care about productivity. And for the last time for ACJC, I am so proud to propose.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
All right, just like 10 seconds.
Sure.
All right, I'm gonna start. 3, 2, 1, start. Okay, panel, right at the onset, we must understand that all of the government houses harms are essentially harms not due to the aspect of productivity, but due to the aspect of glorifying achievements and competition at the same place, right? At that point in time, we believe the lot of harms that they point out, such as stress, such as emotional support, etc., is the diagnosis for that is not getting rid of productivity. The diagnosis for that is getting rid of the aspect of saying that competition and achieving everything in life is not necessary, right? It is not about getting rid of productivity at the first place. But unfortunately, we live in the world where achievements are be all end all. And at that point in time, we believe productivity is the best mechanism to achieve access this particular world in the first place, and for every single individual involved in the first place, right? This is our stance. So before I move on to my substantials even further, let's look at both government houses, and I'll clearly highlight to you how exactly they followed this debate, right? Firstly, closing government. They tell you that individuals rely on emotional support and hence they will no longer be able to do so, right? Panel, understand, if an individual on their side of the house or on our side of the house is somebody who's discontent with his particular life because he hasn't achieved anything or because he feels useless, at that point in time on their side of the house, that individual has no exit mechanism to now go ahead and try to get out of that particular life, right? We do not believe that on our side of the house, even if we do not believe on their side of the house all of a sudden he wants to get to know people a lot more like they claim, just because he is jobless and because productivity does not exist anymore, right? What happens on the converse on our side of the house is simply that productivity gives that particular person a mechanism for that person to go ahead and exit. More on this later. Secondly, they tell us a very weird thing of society productivity reduces because of stress. Panel, my partner already gave you a far more sophisticated construct about how society is actually better off with productivity because of scientific achievements and scientific measures that would have never occurred if we didn't glorify the aspect of productivity in the first place. So this point does not stand whatsoever. And this last very weird point they bring up, that workers will not consent to have their hours reduced. Two layers of responses under this. Firstly, workers work not because they want to work, but because they have to work to earn money in the first place, right? Hard work is not productivity. Productivity is efficiency. At that point in time, we believe on their side of the house, workers will continue to work long hours because they are paid less, but on our side of the house, they will now be more productive. So on the workplace, they will look for ways to be more productive. They will look for ways in their life away from the workplace to be more productive and maybe look for different earning streams that exist, right? This is what productivity means. It means working towards long-term aims the most efficient way possible. Not that you want to work very hard and not that because you're depressed because of competition. This is exactly the reason why closing government is easily out of this debate, right? Let's focus on opening government. We agree with the characterization that, look, we live in a capitalistic world. At that point in time, the only way you can achieve a better life in that particular way is if you're productive. What did it tell you? It leads to burnout. Again, hard work is not productivity. You have to work hard. A lot of people have to work hard because they have no choice, and because these restaurant workers or factory workers are paid less, so they have to compensate by working more. It's not because they enjoy and they are brainwashed into believing productivity is better. Because of that simple misunderstanding, they fall out of this debate, right? The next thing they tell you is less overall holistic development. Again, productivity in fact leads to more development on our side, because productivity is not just working hard or not just working in a particular field. You can work in many different fields. You can try to work hard. It's about feeling well towards yourself and achieving that something in a particular field long term, right? At that point in time, we believe there'll be more holistic development on our side of the house, because you'll be far more likely to try out different fields that exist and try to be productive in each of those particular fields, right? On their side of the house, this concept does not exist anymore. So you're only working for the sake of earning money and working as many hours as possible. So this is exactly why they follow this debate, right? The last thing to tell you is companies overwork you. Again, overwork is not productivity, that has been addressed. So what do we tell you from side closing opposition, right? We have sophisticatedly subsummarized proven to you that why productivity is the only exit mechanism for a lot of different individuals, right? Firstly, on the individual level, on the child, right? A child growing up will only learn to work hard and will only learn the values when that particular child sees that people are working hard in different fields, right? That does not mean teaching the child that work 12 hours in a factory. That means teaching the child that you can be successful in different fields as long as you put in the effort and you want to efficiently work in that particular field, right? And even if they want to believe in the caricature representation of productivity is just hard work, people will have to work hard on their side as well, right? At that point in time, people will continue to, and the child will continue to be brainwashed, and so that's inexclusive at best. Secondly, we tell you that it's good for adults. I'll understand. For many adults, even if we believe that they are, a lot of adults are not feeling depressed and they feel discontent in their life, the only way for them to break out of the system is by the means of productivity. And that, because these people are depressed because they are not achieving as much as other people, right? The productivity is the best mechanism for them to achieve something, because now they will look at different ways that they can be productive. They will look into different fields that they can be productive. This is something that is completely different from what government tells you, because that particular individual on their side of the house will continue to wallow in self-pity, will continue to stay depressed, because that person has no mechanism. He hasn't seen other productive individuals who have broken out of similar cycles. On our side of the house, when you glorify productivity, you see the other individuals from the same conditions as you, who have done similar things, who have done their hands in different things, who are now able to break out from this monotony of productivity. I will take opening.
The desire for productivity, which, as you said, is to continue working efficiently and doing the most that you can, has often led to people sacrificing things like their social lives, their mental and physical health, and like pursuing their hobbies, which can also lead to them breaking out the cycle of like being sad. Why is this less important on your?
Right. Understand, panel, two things over here. Firstly, people have to work, okay? They have to live. We do not believe in the representation of holistic development because for a lot of people, that's not even an option, right? At that point in time, there are two scenarios. On their side, they continue working for the sake of working and only do a particular monotonous job because they want to earn money. On our side of the house, that particular person sees different ways in which productivity is being manifested. At that point, he can look into different fields to invest his time in, and that will lead to better outcomes, right? We do not believe on both sides of the house. We do not believe social interaction is that less or that more, because individuals have to work on both sides of the house, right? You cannot live in a world where work is not important. Unfortunately, due to the simple misunderstanding of what hard work and productivity is, both government houses are out. The last thing we'll tell you is how standard of human life has increased drastically due to productivity. Panel, science awards productivity. Science awards things such as reaching the solution the quickest, looking at different ways of approaching a solution. This is exactly what embodies productivity in the first place, right? You would have never developed things such as vaccines, such as computers, because computers were literally made from the concept of a transistor, which is the same thing but a more efficient form. These all things come from the need to be productive because individuals wanted to be productive, and these are the reasons such inventions exist in the first place, right? So panel, why have we won this debate? Simply, we're the only side who understands what productivity actually means and do not conflate it with hard work or do not conflate it with achievements like other government houses do. We're the only ones who tell you how children are better off on our side, how adults are better off on our side, and how the overall society, which has always been a bastion of productivity, continues to be better on our side because individuals now look for different ways to put in their work. For all those reasons, we're extremely proud to oppose this debate.